Hey everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Yo, what's happening, Rush Nation? It is Monday night, and I'm here with a member of the family who's decided to keep me company this week. Just to get some of the business out of the way, first of all, yes, a Wave Wire video has not gone out. This global outage, I did put this on Twitter, stopped this from recording earlier, which means I wasn't able to get that recorded. I'm going to get it done after this. We'll get it out, and it will be out. The article is out. The podcast will hopefully be out tonight. This podcast, if you're listening to this, you can ignore that. All of it would have gone out by that point. But if you're watching this on the live stream, then we are getting it out. The article's up. You can see it on the, if you go on the 5 Yard feed, or go straight to the 5 Yard Rush website, 5yardrush.co.uk. The Wave Wire article is out, along with some other articles that dropped today with the college guys and dynasty guys. So it's all been very busy, but this global outage has affected us, as has affected millions of people across the globe. But whilst we're waiting for WhatsApp and everything else to come back online, come sit with us, ask us some questions. We're going to keep it going. And before I introduce the member of the family who's joining me today, just got to do some business, pay some bills. And today's show is, it's brought to you by Manscaped. And if you like looking after your balls, our friends at Manscaped, the global leaders in below the waist grooming, want you to shave your pubes with the Tom Brady of ball trimmers. And the brand new Lawnmower 4.0 is for the greatest balls of all time. That is yours. When you're going towards the end zone, make sure you use the right tools for the job and choose Manscaped. Myself and over 2 million men worldwide trust them. So join the movement and use the code 5yard at manscaped.com for 20% off plus free shipping. That's the code 5yard for 20% off plus free shipping. And I promise you, it is well worth the investment with the Skin Guard technology, with the 4000K light. Everything will make sure that you are protecting your most valuable assets and make sure that you have the closest shave possible and that you're well trimmed and well groomed below the belt. And I know that your significant others will appreciate that as well. So check it out, manscaped.com. As I mentioned, today's guest, Nath, is in the house here from the 5 Yard IDP podcast. I wanted to bring on some family here and talk about week 4 because it was a bit crazy. But Nath, you've never been on the flagship, so welcome, friend and family member, brother. I don't know what annotation we're going to go with. Let's go with brother. Why not?
Go with brother.
How are things, my brother?
Well, yeah, things are good. Thanks for having me on. It's been a bit of a random weekend for me. It was a heavy weekend. I've had a get together with some friends it's the first time since the lockdown that we'd all seen each other, which resulted in quite a bit more drinking than we wanted to, and it resulted in me losing my wallet. So yesterday was cancelling cards, and today was feeling sorry for myself pretty much. So I'm glad to be on here, put it that way.
Yeah, that's no good, my man. And it's always worse. That's the worst outcome of a night out. People say it's when you spend more money than you should have done. No. When you have to go and cancel all your cards and you have to go through all that rigmarole. There's a far worse result than having spent 250 quid in only else. So
absolutely, it's been a nightmare. Absolute nightmare.
I've got this to come, so I'll be moving house probably in the next 6 weeks, and I'm going to have to go through that rigmarole of changing my address everywhere once that's done, and I'm not looking forward to it. But no one cares about these problems. They're here to talk about their own problems and fantasy football. Before we get into week 4, because it was an interesting week, you obviously head up the IDP podcast. So for those who perhaps subscribe to the feed or watching this live, haven't listened to the IDP podcast, or perhaps have never played IDP, give a little bit of breakdown as to what the IDP pod is, why people should play IDP, and sell it. This is the time. Let's sell IDP. Let's get more than 3% of the fantasy football community playing IDP.
So if I just cover it off from my sort of story, really. So I got into fantasy football about 7 years ago. Is one of my my best friends, he's a big Atlanta Falcons fan. We're going Saturday, by the way. Yeah, so I started following them originally with one eye on trying to find my own team to support. And it didn't take me long to fall in love with the Minnesota Vikings. And it was all based on their defense, really. The next year, I got into fantasy football and realized quite quickly that the players that I like the most, I couldn't pick them up because we weren't playing IDP. It was, that side of things. And well, I think we were on Flea Flicker back then, or I can't remember what we were on.
Wow.
I know, yeah, it was awful. But when we transferred over, that was our chance to change things up a bit. So we went IDP, and that's it. From that point on, I say 50% of the leagues that I play in now are IDP leagues. That made just made a huge difference to what we were doing, because even in that first 2 years, there was only 6 of us, so the league was limited anyway to those core kind of players. Obviously now it's grown a bit further, but after that, I then got more and more involved in IDP and followed lots of people on Twitter and on accounts, and obviously yourself, and then got in touch with you guys and said, look, I'm thinking about really getting into fantasy football and the IDP side of things and doing something a bit different. Come up with a IDP plus scoring, where I was playing so many different IDP leagues with all different types of scoring, and talking about it was a problem, because one player would be doing okay in one league and not so well in the other. So actually saying, a player was a top performer, you couldn't commit to that without having to put a cover note every time saying, depending on your scoring. So hence the reason for IDP Plus. And then we created the leagues. We've got a lot of players playing that, and then built the podcast and went from there. There's some great guys out there on Twitter for the IDP world now. And it is growing massively. We've just gone from strength to strength with it. So, for me, it's just a straightforward add-on. If if you're doing well in fantasy football and you're enjoying what you're doing, and you haven't tried playing the IDP format and adding those extra players, it just seems like a bit of a next step. Or even if you don't like it, you don't like it. I'm not one of these people that says you've got to do it, but it is one of those things. If you haven't, I'm like, well, why? Give it a go. It's just another set of players, and another, it's very interesting to talk about the linemen when you're talking about sacks and pressures, edge rushers when you're talking about those outside linebackers, and it's just good fun to link all that together and to talk about it.
Yeah, I completely agree. There's some great IDP leagues out there. The ones I can immediately think of at the top of my head that I play in. Simo, the commissioner, was on the game show week 1, and he's part of 5 Yard College. He runs the BFFL. That is a very interesting format where it actually rewards DBs significantly higher than other quote unquote standard IDP leagues. So linebackers and DBs far more important than linemen. Linemen actually pretty much an afterthought in that sort of format, which is good. I think it adds an extra dimension to it. I think of my friend Peter again in Germany, who runs what is arguably the craziest league, and me, I run crazy leagues. He runs a league called Shark Tank, and it is single-handedly the most bizarre. I mean, that's an IDP haven of difficulty, and it's a brilliant league. And we, you mentioned you're doing them. We've always had an IDP listener league. I always feel it's a very important part of the game, because it does help you get into a better understanding of the game. Like, my knowledge of the game has come on tenfold because of playing IDP over the last 10 plus years. But it is, as you say, the biggest challenge is the scoring. There isn't a universal scoring like in regular fantasy football, where it's PPR or half point, which hardly anyone ever plays. It's just really for ranking purposes, or standard. And that's really, it's like, well, okay, it's PPR or standard. Whereas IDP is like, well, how many points is a sack worth? How many points do you do passes defended? One of the things I remember you and I went backwards and forwards on was quarterback hits, because quarterback hit is a subjective metric. Some sites will class a quarterback hit as a hit, and some won't. It depends on the level of pressure of the hit and where it was, what part of the body. So I said it is a bit of a subjective metric because it's not standard across the board. Depending on where you get that information will depend on the scoring.
Absolutely.
So, which leads it, I think, to be a bit awkward, but it's an interesting format. So I love it. But let's get on to we can mention some IDP players as we go through this, but let's cover off week 4 because it was crazy. I remember I was watching this last night, and I was watching the first couple of hours of Red Zone, and I don't know what it is at the moment. I kind of feel like the afternoon, the first slate of games, it lacks. I said this last week with Bob. I said this the week before. There isn't that much. I mean, to be fair, the Jets and the Titans game did produce that. It produced that drive. That took a long time, that game, to get going. But once it got going, it was great. But, you've got Washington. Washington and Falcons was pretty good, actually. But the Bills blowing out the Texans. You had the Colts blowing out the Dolphins. You had a lot of games that were just a bit like meh. And then you get the evening games. And then that was where all the heavy hitters kind of came in. But I do find at the moment, I don't know what it is, like I'd love to see some really good games in that 6 o'clock window, because I just find at the moment it's like the starter, isn't it? It's kind of like it's good, like I'm getting into this, but really it's the 9:25 or the 4:25 window. That's when it's like, okay, this is like the big boys have come out to play. This is the main course. And then Sunday night, Monday football, but even Thursday night football the last few weeks has been pretty good. There's been some really good games on Thursday night football. So it's interesting. But what would you say, right, if we're recapping this for people, the 3 things that really surprised you this week in week 4, given what we know about teams now? We've had a month of looking at them. What were some things that you just didn't expect in week 4 that happened from a fantasy perspective?
I suppose, one thing that really got me was the Titans' use of Derek at times during the game. I don't know whether you really picked up on it. I know they've got to rest him from time to time, but they spent a lot of time in good scoring positions with him off the field. And I'm not. If I was a Titans fan, that would really get my go. I mean, I really picked up on him because I had him in a few leagues, and obviously when he's off the field, do you think to yourself, but yeah, I felt that they had a chance to get out of sight at some stages in that game and to really push on. But they kept, when the Jets were close, they stayed in it, and it was great to see Zach make the throws that he made towards the end of the game.
And I thought it was more bizarre given the fact there was no Julio Jones and no AJ Brown.
Yeah.
So it was like, okay, so your whole offense is effectively Ryan Tannehill, Derrick Henry, and then you're relying on Nick Westbrook and Chester Rogers.
Yeah.
And I think Ferks was out. Like, you got nothing. Like, and when you're in that situation, you've got the best running back in football. What? Yeah, it's like you say. For me, Derrick Henry should have carried the ball 40 times. Like, he should have just, and if you're not going to play him, then play McNichols.
Yeah, I like McNichols, and but I quite like him. Why not put him on the pitch at the same time for that point of view, just to take Derrick off the pitch straight away? You could see the Jets go, okay, well that's, Tannehill last season, I remember a lot of quarterback sneaks and stuff like that. He just doesn't seem to be doing the same thing, but that seems to carry on with Henry off the field. They can't use that anymore because everybody was expecting it to go to Henry, and if he's not on the field, well,
here's how you beat the Titans, right? It's really, really simple game plan. What you do, if AJ Brown isn't playing, you just stack the box. You stack the box completely, and you say to Tannehill, off you go.
Yeah.
Because this season he just doesn't look up to it. I think he's been pretty poor as a quarterback. He's current. Yes, I mean, and that offensive line has never been brilliant, but what he was always doing was proving elusive. I mean, he's quarterback 16 so far. He's going to get passed by Herbert and Carr, we would expect tonight. So he's really looking at quarterback 18. in fantasy football. And to be honest, that's about right. I think he has been pretty average. So yeah, it was strange to see Henry not get as much usage as you would expect. I think the Jets dealt with him really well. I think we've got to give some credit that Robert Saleh really did. They really stopped him from penetrating and getting those big plays. They let him have his 4 or 5 yards. They let him have a couple of plays where he got, but he struggled to do those big breakaway runs that we kind of see in the fourth quarter from the traditional Derrick Henry. He's always been in the second half when defenses are tired, pressuring, but didn't happen yesterday. And the AFC South is the 2021 version of the 2020 NFC East, because I tell you what, all 4 of those teams look pretty poor right now for different reasons. I thought something that really shocked me this week, given what happened last week with the Buccaneers, and I appreciate Bill Belichick obviously knows Brady better than anyone else, but I was really surprised by how poor the Buccaneers were in the red zone. When you think of all the weapons that they have, and everyone's, with the exception of Gronk, was essentially fit, it shows me how important Gronk is to this team. And it seems like an obvious thing to say, like he's Gronkowski, he's one of the best of all time. But it's interesting when he is not there, how one-dimensional that offense is in the red zone. Because the Buccaneers got down there a lot. They made a lot of third down conversions. They did all the right things. And then they get inside the 10, then inside the 20, and they just look clueless. And, I've never seen the Buccaneers settle for so many field goals. I mean, we're going back to old school Buccaneers couldn't move the football, just taking field goals and hoping that's enough. And it was a bit of a throwback game. And I was just surprised that Godwin wasn't really overly involved. They tried to get Antonio Brown involved late. They clearly saw a matchup there and were targeting that to try and win the game. Evans was heavily covered because he is the red zone threat. I just didn't see a plan B. They didn't look good running the ball in the red zone. They look good running the ball elsewhere, which is improvement on previous weeks. But I'm a bit concerned looking at that red zone offense as to what is going on, because that was the difference between Brady week 1, week 2 versus Brady week 3, week 4. We had 9 touchdowns in those first 2 weeks, and a lot of them came inside the red zone. 4 of them went to Gronk. And it just seems to me that if he is not in that, if he's not playing, I mean, it looks like Godwin's not getting any love down there at all. It looks like AB's going to get some. It looks like Evans is going to get some. I mean, they even targeted Break down there a couple of times, which didn't shock me. But it looks like they're reluctant to try and run it in, unless, I mean, I know Rojo got the touchdown, but I just don't think it's an interesting one for me. I'm a little concerned that they're struggling there because, especially if you're the fantasy owners of someone like Evans relies on that red zone production in order to be a top 15 fantasy football wide receiver, because he's so boom and bust. And he relies on touchdowns. Touchdowns is what keeps him, well up the tallies, and he needs those 10 touchdowns a season really to keep on pace. I just don't see if they're going to struggle down there. I'm kind of looking at the Bucs wide receivers now and thinking, I said this before the season. I said I just don't want Park Godwin, because you can get AB 5 rounds later, and he is like Godwin light, and he basically is. But I'm a bit concerned as a Mike Evans owner that if they can't get that going in the red zone, his value could really plummet quickly. So that's one to keep an eye on. Anything else kind of catch your eye that really sort of surprised you in week 4?
I suppose not really from the week 4 side of things, but just to this point, I am surprised how good the Bills are now across both sides of the ball. And now they've got a run game going now, which you think, okay, so if all that does tie in together, they're difficult to go against now week in, week out. And also to go away, not just the Bills, but I've got to give. So I'm not a massive fan of Arizona. Some people will know this. A lot of friends. I've got friends that I've got 3 or 4 really mad Arizona friends, and they rub it in my face quite a bit about how great their players are and all this kind of stuff. Whether it be Kyler, Hopkins, Simmons, all that kind of thing. They just think that they're. However, credit where credit's due. I mean, I thought that was That was impressive against the Rams. I didn't see it coming at all. So yeah, for me, it would be the Bills and Arizona, two teams that are really doing. I didn't expect this.
No, Arizona, I'm with you. I think have been terrific through 4 weeks. You'd argue that they probably have been the best team in the NFL. What I will say about Arizona is, and I said this about Pittsburgh, the difference is Arizona have played good teams. Right? The way they dispatched the Rams was emphatic, really, when you come to think of it. My measure of a team, and this is where people are always too early to crown teams. That's why I always think power rankings at this stage are a little bit mute, because I want to see what they're like when they lose, because they will lose. And it's how quickly they rebound. Because we saw this with Pittsburgh, right? Pittsburgh ran off to an 11-0 record last year, playing basically the second fiddle of the NFL. They were playing pretty average teams, weren't beating many top teams. And then they came unstuck. And then they barely made the playoffs, went out round one to the Browns in one of the most calamitous performances I think you'll see in the playoffs for years. I mean, it was horrific. Giving up the touchdown on their opening possession, like with the ball going over Ben Roethlisberger's heads and going for a touchdown 20 seconds into the game, and they had the ball. This is what I mean. The Steelers kind of show you, and that's where I kind of measure teams. Is it's all right jumping out to a lead, but it's how you combat and come back from that. And that's why you looked at Tampa last year, and no one fancied them going into the playoffs or winning the thing, but they played everyone. They'd had some difficult games. They'd come through some adversity. You kind of saw what they were made of. Whereas the Packers never really faced that much adversity. Yeah, okay, they got outplayed by the Bucks in week 6, but other than that, you didn't really see a lot. They weren't really tested. The Saints never really get tested, and then when they do, they falter. That's the difference between good teams and great teams, is when they get tested and face adversity, how do they rebound? And that, for me, is the test of Arizona right now. I think the Bills have had that adversity because they lost the title game last year. They kind of are battle hardened through that. I think we need to see that from Arizona. But yeah, credit to them through week 4. A team I want to talk about.
How do you rate the Chase Edmonds Connor 1-2 punch? Yeah, I mean, I was not a massive fan before the start of the season. I'm very dubious about it. Didn't put Edmonds slightly above Connor in who I took, really. But that seems to be working well.
Do you know why I think it works well? I think it works well because they both are injury-prone backs. And so not having as much of a workload actually helps them, because they can kind of both work to their capacity and not get hurt and put in 100% without running out of gas. And I think that is where it's smart. It's smart. You're seeing more and more teams do this now, that the bell cow back in the NFL is going to be virtually dead in the next 2 to 5 years, because teams are realizing that you need 2 or 3 backs to recycle to take the workload off, because the backs that are going down are these workhorse backs, the CMCs. These are the ones that get hurt because there's too much on their shoulders. David Montgomery went down yesterday because they've not played anyone else. And finally Damien Williams comes in and does something. And this is what I mean. If you have an over-reliance on one back, this is where the Browns were miles ahead of everybody else. They signed Kareem Hunt when they had Nick Chubb. Everyone thought that's lunacy. Yeah. But actually, the way they use them is very smart. They make them both relevant. They both make big plays, and they keep them both happy and in service. And as a result, all right, I know Nick Chubb got injured last season, but even when that happens, it's next man up. You've got something there to run on. And I think it's smart. I think you'll see more teams. I mean, you've already seen more teams do this. But I mean, like, if the Steelers lose Najee Harris, they're dead in the water. If we see this with definitely yesterday, the CMC effect is definitely hitting, and no one is going to be as good as CMC. But Chuba Hubbard doesn't look half the player, and that's no disrespect to him. I mean, very few players are half the player CMC is. But this is what I mean. You need to have these rotational backs in, and that is going to hurt fantasy production. But you're right. I mean, I think Connor and and Edmonds have proved to be highly effective whilst being. I mean, they've been fine. I mean, they're not going to appear on too many highlight reels, but they get the job done. And for fantasy, they've been okay. Edmonds is currently the running back 10, I think he is.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's the running back 10. Connor, the running back 22. Like, if you drop now, you'd be pretty happy with their production and what they've done. Whilst it's not been show-stopping, lights out kind of stuff, it ticks over and gets points. And that's important. Something that's really sort of shocked me when I started to dig into this was the Bengals. And I've just been a bit curious as to the Bengals are 3-1, which is an amazing turnaround considering they'd won 5 games in 2 years under Zach Johnson. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, I don't really know where they're going to go. But I am highly concerned about. I have quite a lot of Jamar Chase. I have a bit of Joe Burrow, but I am a little concerned of how this offense is producing right now, because they're so efficient in the red zone. They're uber efficient in the red zone, but they're not getting down there enough. So their points are coming just outside the red zone or further. They're coming off these big plays. Teams will cut that off. And it's, can they get enough traction in the red zone? Looks like Mixon's hurt. Looks like he's going to miss some time potentially. They don't really have a back that is going to, we're looking at what Chris Evans maybe might do something. So my worry now with the Bengals is, I mean, I pulled some of the stats here. I was looking at their red zone usage, but they've had 7 pass attempts inside the 20. They completed 6 and they've scored 4 TDs off them, which is ridiculous. I mean, that is just a ridiculous set of efficiency beyond all measure. And that's not sustainable. And yes, it's a small sample size, but it's the fact that Joe Burrow, of all the starting quarterbacks who have played 4 games, has the lowest amount of attempts inside the 20. That is what he's got, less attempts than Baker Mayfield. Like, that is a concern. And if you're thinking about, I look at these metrics and think, okay, what does that mean? That means that there's not a lot of red zone targets going along. It's difficult to see who's going to get them, which means touchdown production becomes a little bit more random. And where's it all going to come from? And if they hit a dry spell, if teams go, I mean, look at what happened in the Super Bowl, right? And I always refer back to this because the Buccaneers said, right, what we're going to do is we're going to take the big play away. You're going to let Tyreek Hill go for 200 yards. You can have 10, 15 yards outside. Fine. We'll give you 10, 15 yards to Kelsey over the middle. That's fine. Because what we're going to do is we're going to get you to, you might end up inside our half, but we will stop you when it's a shorter field, because we'll just squeeze the pressure and we'll suffocate you and force you to make a ridiculous play to score. And what happened was they didn't. And that is how I see teams are now going to start to play the Bengals. They're going to go, okay, Joe Burrow, you can have yards over the field. Fine. You can start using CJ Uzuma over the middle. Fine. Yeah, Jamar Chase, you can have a 15-yard catch outside. What we're going to do is we're going to prevent the big play. And so when you get to 30 to go, 25 to go, we're going to let you see if you got it. Now, so far they have, 7 inside the red zone, 6 completed, 4 touchdowns. So they've answered everything, but they're not getting down there enough because they are relying on those big plays to score. And that is not a strategy that's going to work 17 games. So I'm a little concerned now as Jamar Chase owner, and I'm hoping it's just a case of they sort this out. They get more opportunities, everything goes fine. But they need to get the ball down in the red zone more, and they need to not necessarily keep the efficiency up, but they just need to get more attempts down there and support the players, because at this moment, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, they're almost out producing their points expected because they're not getting those red zone targets. So just be a bit wary, because if you're sitting there thinking of lineups week to week, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, I mean, I know T. Higgins was out this week, could all of a sudden really take a nosedive, because teams will finally figure out how to mark these guys, how to play them in coverage, and say, right, okay, you can get some yards, but we're just going to stop you from scoring in the red zone. And you're either going to have to do something spectacular, or you're going to have to bust the coverage. So that's my thing on the Bengals, and that's not to panic anyone. That's not to say sell Jamar Chase now or anything like that. But it is just something to keep an eye on, because if the Bengals are going to struggle to to not get the ball in the red zone, there's a knock-on effect that's going to come as a result of that. So you just keep an eye on it. It's not a sell anyone. It's not you need to be worried. It's just hopefully it will change and the tendencies will change. And if Joe Mixon's down, it almost certainly will. But I would just, when I'm looking at my lineups every week, I'm thinking, is Jamar Chase the must start that he has been up till now? Because 1 week or two he's going to start blanking. I mean, he wasn't particularly great on Thursday Night Football when he should have been a smash matchup, but we'll go from there. In terms of main learnings, right? So we're 4 weeks in, so we've got a good amount of data. What would you say is something that you have picked up from fantasy football that you think is highly important to use going forward?
Probably for me, it would be, you touched on it. I think it might have even been on last week's pod or the pod before, where you were talking about the flex spots really, and whether it was time to maybe ditch maybe a couple of those running backs that might have been in that spot. And this week is proven maybe the other way. And I think sometimes you just got to stick with your gut a little bit on these kind of flex spot plays, and it's just got to be mainly down to these matchups that are half decent. If you've got to go with them sometimes, these players. I mean, there seems to be an absolute bag full of these fringe wide receivers that could go big, boom or bust. There seems to be lots at the moment. The whole anybody that plays for Detroit, anybody that you've got the Saints, Callaway, and players like that. I mean, you think, are they anywhere near starting? And you could be dropping them. Last week, I mean, I looked at it from, if you looked at the players like James Conner, Leonard Fournette, Chase Edmonds, James Robinson, they could have been dropped by players, and possibly rightly so, but they'd be kicking themselves if they did it, because they all scored well this week. And it's just about bearing with some things. At the start of the season, you don't get that consistency. You do get, freak things. And there is that group of teams at the moment where we don't know. They haven't even got a wide receiver one. I don't understand this year why we've got so many teams where you're not quite sure who their wide receiver one is, and we're in week 4 and you think, I'm not sure who the wide receiver one is in New Orleans. I'm not sure who it is in Detroit at this moment in time. And you look across and you think, well, putting those players in, actually, that is complete. They're complete dart throws. They are at the moment, all of those players. And it's just, on what I've just looked at a few lineups that I've been playing against in that, and watched people just take a punt on these and thought, you've just dropped Chase Edmonds. Oh, I don't know whether you should have done.
Yeah, I agree with you. When I made that point, and I stand by it even now, is I'm not saying you should drop Chase Edmonds or you should be dropping these running backs, because I think they still hold a place on rosters for injuries, for situational changes, etc. And you make a good point on teams like Detroit, where I'd much rather have the 2 running backs than have any of the wide receivers, and the same in New Orleans. Completely agree with that. In fact, I'd rather have Johnson over anyone but Kamara, really, to be honest, in New Orleans. But my point is that the points at the position are extremely scarce. So to give you an example, right, let's get rid of. So I'm going to take the studs out. I know there's a few freaks. Cordell Patterson is the running back 2 in fantasy football right now, and he's played a game less than most players. In PPR. Right, so I'm gonna exclude the studs, right? And I say the studs, people went in the first 2 rounds of drafts, which kind of takes me up to Antonio Gibson is the running back 15, right? And then you've got Melvin Gordon, Jamal Williams 16, 17, Jonathan Taylor 18, Darrell Henderson 19, Clyde Edwards-Helaire 20, Chris Carson 21, right? So we're now at 20 RB 22. So you've got James Conner, Kenneth Gainwell, Leonard Fournette, Zach Moss, who was a healthy scratch week 1, by the way. He's been terrific since. Madness, though, who's a healthy scratch week 1. Tony Pollard, Mike Davis, J.D. McKissick, Dalvin Cook, Joe Mixon, who have both been hurt, are down there. James Robinson. my point is, I wouldn't be dropping any of these guys. In fact, I encourage you. Kenneth Gainwell's still available in 3/4 of leagues, which is madness.
Yeah.
To pick him up and stash him, but I'm not sure if I'm starting Kenneth Gainwell on the average of 11.7 fantasy points per game over the likes of, these are some guys, and you mentioned like boom or busts here. Van Jefferson has 11.9 on average fantasy points per game. And he's the wide receiver 35. But you could get guys right now on the waiver wire. AJ Green is not owned in 70% of leagues plus. Emmanuel Sanders isn't owned in 65% of leagues plus. Christian Kirk, all these guys have over 13 points per game on average. These are the guys I would be starting. Zach Pascal, 12.2 points per game, but he's the second most targeted red zone player in the NFL. These are the sorts of players I would be starting, but that doesn't mean you should be dropping them.
Yeah.
But my point is, if you're looking at stability and consistency of points in your flex, unless you're starting the studs, the top 15 running backs, they're not going to reliably get you points on a regular basis. That's the concern, because the floor is quite low, but the ceiling is capped because no team is running the ball brilliantly well, with the exception of maybe Cleveland. There are teams that are struggling to run the football. There are teams that are not putting up heavy yards. I mean, New England yesterday, played an entire game against the Buccaneers and had -1 rushing yard for the entire game. I mean, it's baffling. Teams are struggling to run the football in the NFL, and they're struggling to do it consistently, which is why, for me, when I look at snap shares, I look at points and where they're coming from. Having wide receivers in your flex is going to give you a better opportunity to win games. Certainly going to have you a safer floor. And with the upside, it's an ultimate win-win. But yeah, as you say, dropping people like Chase Evans is madness. Dropping Leonard Fournette is madness. Like, you shouldn't be dropping backs. You should just stash them away. All these players are one injury away from being heavily relevant. In fact, I mean, Chase Evans is relevant. Anyone's dropped him, he's a running back 10. You're mad. But it's at the point where when you're building your lineups, if you were like, for me, any start sit that involves, I don't know, any running back that's like, do I start Zach Moss, or do I start like Michael Pittman, or do I start like Naheem Hines, or do I start AJ Green or Jalen Waddle? Like, that's not a conversation that needs to be had. Like, you always go with the wide receiver because those guys are very, very limited floor. And yes, do you know what? On the odd week, Naheem Hines might outscore AJ Green, Jalen Waddle. It might happen. It's quite possible it will happen. But from a strategic standpoint, that is not going to happen often. So you always go with the play that is going to yield you the best return the majority of the time. And that's why the point is about wide receivers. So yeah, I'm completely with you that you shouldn't be dropping these players. But yeah, I just think prudence in there.
I can see it from that side. I think it's just that feel where people were just losing a little bit of faith out of those, those, like you said, running back 10, 11, 12, where you go, well, just hold on. And it's the same with people. I mean, I've even had conversations with people giving up on Barkley and Taylor, and you're like,
crazy.
Come on, just give it time. They will come good.
Yeah, absolutely. It's no time to hit panic station on any player right now who's a running back, with the exception of if they pull an injury. Then that's when it's time. For me, the only running back right now in fantasy football that you can give up on, I think, and this is a shame, is because someone I like is Tyson Williams. He's probably the only one because his job is pretty much gone now. Other than that, I think anyone you've got rostered is pretty suitable, unless it's someone completely obscure and random. Like Gio Bernard, he should never be rostered to begin with. I kind of told people that. He was never going to be a thing. Like, you can drop Gio Bernard. He might eventually have a great game, but it's not going to be a consistent production kind of job. He's just basically the Shady McCoy replacement in Tampa. So, but don't, like, people are going to look at Damien Harris after yesterday and go, I'm going to drop Damien Harris. Don't drop Damien Harris. Just don't drop him. Like, don't play him, Don't get me wrong. If you don't feel confident, don't play him. I'd back you on that 100%. Don't drop him. Just keep him on your roster. You never know what might happen. I agree with you. And in fact, my big learning point here goes with yours on running backs. I'm going to stick with this. Running backs, we talk about this every year, and we're trying to project who the top running backs are going to be. And for me, it's now the point of the top running backs are going to be the ones that play all the games. And that sounds really like, oh, well, that sounds obvious, doesn't it? You play the most games, you get the most points. Yeah, I understand that's pretty obvious. But my point is, very few running backs are going to play 17 games.
Yeah.
Like, very few. Because they're just going down like flies. There aren't many elite backs left who haven't been injured at some point, either coming off a big injury or been injured this year. And I'm looking at it as like Derrick Henry, for me, has the clear path to be the number one running back in football in PPR, even though he's not going to catch many balls, because he's the only one that's completely indestructible. Like, it doesn't matter. He just doesn't get injured. He defies logic. Like, Derrick Henry is like the Tom Brady of running backs. He just somehow keeps going when everyone projects he can't do it. He just goes, nah, I'll keep going. I mean, people usually like he was taken out of games. You looked at it yesterday and thought, oh, I don't think he had a good game. And you look at it, he's put up like 128 yards rushing.
Yeah.
You're like, I don't even think he's had a good game. 128 yards. He's like baffling. And like, I look at this now, and I'm looking at the top running backs in fantasy football, and I genuinely believe the top 6 are going to be the ones that are left standing at the end of the year. And that could be DeAndre Swift. That could be Najee Harris. That could be, I mean, Aaron Jones, because of the way he's used. I mean, everyone was down on Zeke. He's running back 5 right now. And you see, running back 5 right now, he's less than 5 points behind Cordell Patterson that's a running back 2. Like, Cordell Patterson could be a top 6 in fantasy football just simply because he will play all the games. Because the way that his usage is locked in, he's unlikely to get overused. And, like, that is a big thing. So when people panic when, like, oh, Sony Michel's come in and that's going to damage Darrell Henderson, I was the complete opposite. I was like, actually, that's a great thing for Darrell Henderson. Because Darrell Henderson's likely to get to the end. Oh, he didn't. But he could have been quite likely to get to the end of the season. And, like, that's the point, is never fear backs coming in. You know, this is what, you mentioned Chase Edmonds. The only reason Chase Edmonds is good right now is because James Conner's there to take some of the work. And the only reason James Conner's relevant is because Chase Edmonds is taking the majority of the work. And that is how these running backs, these good running backs, Aaron Jones is the most efficient running back in football. You know, he doesn't need a 90% workload. He is fantasy relevant and an RB1 on 50-55% of the workload. Now, the only thing I would say, people like Jonathan Taylor needs more workload. He's still struggling to get over 60% of snaps. He needs a little bit more. I'm not saying he needs a lot more, but the reason he'll probably still be there at the end, like he was last season, is because Nyheim Hines takes a lot of that workload.
Yeah.
A lot of the in between the tackles, a lot of when the game's blown out. You know, that's the kind of thing that you want to see. I know it's not good for your points that week, but it's better long term for your running back. So, that's my point. Is don't be annoyed when there is a secondary running back at that, in your team. That just means, in fact, that makes me feel more confident. Like, it's no surprise to me that when you look at them, CPAT has Mike Davis, Aaron Jones. I know CPAT has Mike Davis. I mean, who would have thought that was a sentence we were going to say at the start of the season?
Incredible.
CPAT's the RB2, and he's got Mike Davis supporting him. Like, ridiculous. Aaron Jones has got support. Zeke Elliott's got Tony Pollard. DeAndre Swift has Jamal Williams. Kareem Hunt has Nick Chubb. All these guys all have some form of support, and they're the ones that are starting to escalate to the top. Austin Eckler has support with Roundtree and Jackson. This is the way fantasy football is going to be now, for these guys to be they're going to just be more efficient. They're going to score more points off less plays. That's how it's going to work. So you want competition, not really competition, but you want guys to come in and cement, because it's going to stop your guy from breaking down. So don't fear it. That's what I mean. Top 6 players, top 7 players are going to be the ones that make it to the end. And with the exception of Derrick Henry, he's just a freak of nature. They're probably going to likely have a supporting cast behind him who are going to help. So that was a big takeaway for me. Let's go to some bounce back players, because there is some people panicking. You've mentioned that are extremely concerned on some of the performances of players right now. Mentioned Jonathan Taylor. He's running back 18. He had not a bad weekend actually, but people are a bit worried about him. Clyde Hilaire is running back 20. We've got some wide receiver. DeAndre Hopkins is wide receiver 21 in PPR. CeeDee Lamb pretty much blanked. He's wide receiver 24. There is some people in the community panicking over players right now. You've got Aaron Rodgers as QB 15. Well, who would you predict is likely to come back and come back strong, who perhaps hasn't had a great first month of the season? And why do you think that is?
I'm trying to think off the top of my head, really. I mean, there's two massive candidates that are really obvious to everybody for between week 4 and week 5 for me. The big one's Kelsey. I mean, he had a real off week last week, but if they're going to beat the Bills, they will be over the middle. I'm sure they will be, and he'll be definitely in play. And Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook's got the Lions next week. I mean, that should be, that's where I'm looking for my points if I've got him. But yeah, I'm not sure long term wise this season. Nobody really jumps out at me. I mean, I would think Tannehill has got to figure something out somewhere along the line. I can't see that they won't. I mean, the Titans were decent, and he was decent. I mean, I know you've probably got quite a lot of shares in him, like I have, because he was decent.
I have a couple.
I thought you did, because we were all picking him up like as your second QB, thinking that he was really good value, and just hasn't materialized.
I'll be honest. The only reason I don't is because Tom Brady was left on the board, and I got him everywhere.
Yeah, true.
That was the only reason. Is I would have done. I was prepared to have him. I ranked him pretty well, but it was just like, oh well, Tom Brady or Ryan Tannehill. Well,
I'm quite happy because I had a lot of Sam Darnold. I don't know. I just went for it. I just went through with him.
Why not?
But yeah, I don't know.
Rushing machine Sam Darnold.
Yeah, what was that was the comment, the leading rusher? Yeah. Or at one stage? Oh yeah. Amazing.
No, he's got the most rushing touchdowns in football right now.
Crazy. Absolutely
not just the quarterbacks, of everybody. All players.
Yeah.
He's got more rushing touchdowns than Derrick Henry.
Brilliant.
Go figure.
Yeah, amazing. But yeah. So on bounce back, I would say some of the QBs. I mean, I did predict it with like Justin Fields last week, with people saying, he's not going to have that same game that he had in week 3 to week 4 because it just didn't stack up like that. He's a better QB than that, and I think Tannehill is as well. And I don't. Once the players come back fit, it will change for him. But I mean, yeah, that was disastrous at the weekend for him.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think I think he bounces back. I don't know what he bounces back to. I think that's the only question. Is I don't know what people were kind of expecting. If you're expecting him to be on the fringes of the RB1 the QB1 conversation, then yeah, absolutely, because he's only 11 points behind Kirk Cousins, 11.5 points. You go, well, yeah, that's not outside the realm of possibility that he'll be in that discussion. If you're projecting Ryan Tannehill to be a top 5 QB, I just don't see it. No. But I think for me, if I'm looking at QBs right now, there are real certain candidates here that I think will be a lot better, who will jump up quite radically. The first one is Trevor Lawrence. Now, Trevor Lawrence was someone that the people would have taken as a second QB. They'd have gone with an experienced first QB. Maybe they took a Matt Ryan, maybe they took a Tannehill, maybe they took a Tom Brady, and then they paired them with Trevor Lawrence. And people have been fundamentally disappointed with Trevor Lawrence. But there were some signs in that Week 4 game. He didn't turn the ball over. That's a good sign. He seems to be getting up to speed. We haven't seen a lot of red zone attempts that he's thrown. He's only thrown 10, but he's completed 6. He's got 2 touchdowns off them. There are some signs there that on the peripherals that things are going quite they're improving. They're going in the right direction there for him. So I think he's someone I would expect to bounce back. He's currently QB 30. I'd expect him to jump up. Again, I don't think he's going to be in the QB1 conversation, but I think he's going to usurp certainly quite a few players as he starts to climb these charts a little bit. Same can be said for Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert is currently the QB 21. He rise tonight, but again, I don't think people have seen. I don't think if you drafted Justin Herbert expecting him to be the Justin Herbert of last year, that was never going to happen. He was always going to be in line for regression. But again, I think he's easily going to be in that top 12 conversation. I think it's going to happen. I wouldn't lose faith if I drafted him. If I'm looking at running backs, for me, Trey Sermon's one that people have been fundamentally disappointed with, but every week he's getting better, and every week his competition seems to be getting injured. So I think Trey Sermon is usurping the bench now, and I think he's going to rise to the top as we kind of expected. I always expect him to be a slow burner. I always expect him to be someone who's stashed on my bench through week 6 through week 7. I think once Trey Lance, and it looks like Trey Lance is going to start on Sunday, and it looks like he's going to keep that job. If that's the case, I really expect Trey Sermon's stock to rise. And given that their schedule at the end of the fantasy season, I think if you've stashed him and you've been a bit worried, just hold on to him because he will come good. It will just take a bit more time. But, we got 89 yards on Sunday. It's going to continue to happen. We're starting to see what we wanted to see out of Trey Sermon. And for me, he's about bang on where I thought he would be. So I'm not concerned. If anything, I'm quite encouraged. So, people thinking Elijah Mitchell's going to be a thing. I think he's going to be useful, and I think he'll have big games, the same way that Jeff Wilson has big games when Raheem Mostert was out. But I don't see Elijah Mitchell being the long-term RB1 of this team. I think it is Trey Sermon. They traded up to get him in the draft. They knew what they were getting. Yes, he wasn't great at camp. Yes, he wasn't great when he started in his NFL career. Not many players are. Guess what? Newsflash, it happens. It's called development. But he's getting better every week. And he's been trusted with the ball more. He's getting a bigger role. People, the naysayers will say, well, it's because there's no one else. Yeah, that's true, but it only matters. Possession is 9/10 of the law. He possesses the job because he's the only one there, and that means it's harder for you to rip away that job from him. They're not all of a sudden going to go, "Oh, Elijah Mitchell, I know you've been out for a few weeks, but here you go. Here's 90% rushing share." It's not going to happen. They're going to go with a hot hand, and Trey Sermon looks good, and he's only going to get better. So I wouldn't worry if you drafted Trey Sermon right now. That's for sure. You mentioned, and James Robinson's another one. I think James Robinson will continue to trend up as long as he's healthy. He will trend up. He had a great game on Thursday Night Football. That offense was putrid for the first 3 weeks of the season. It's going to start to click, and it's going to go right for James Robinson. So just keep the faith for James Robinson. It is going to work out now. We will see more James Robinson type games like we did on Thursday. Wide receiver wise, it's an interesting one because it's easy to say like CD Lamb, but of course he's going to bounce back. He's CD Lamb. The one I think has been most disappointing so far is Robert Woods. He's sitting at wide receiver 38. He obviously has not been particularly great. And again, even last week he only got against Tampa in week 3, he only got 33 yards, but he did improve this week. And he is starting to get more on page with Matt Stafford. And what's happening now is people are starting to zero in that Cooper Kupp is the guy you need to cover in this offense. So he's going to draw more coverage, which is why Van Jefferson got touches and broke away and had a good week. It's why Robert Woods will get more coverage because people are starting to. It's what happened 2-3 years ago with the Rams. People were like, well, we'll cover the deep threat. And then they just let Cooper Kupp run right inside. And they went, actually, that's not how we beat the Rams. We have to shut down Cooper Kupp, take away all the Stafford's underneath throws, and we'll make him beat us. We'll make him beat us with the long ball with his dodgy back. And that is how Arizona won the game. Like, we took away all the easy throws and we made him make plays. And listen, Matt Stafford made a lot of plays. He had a very good game. I'm not knocking Matt Stafford at all. But if you take away safety net and you make it difficult for him up the middle, and you take away Cooper Kupp out of the game, which is hard to do, but if you can do it, Robert Woods is going to benefit. Van Jefferson's going to benefit. Robert Woods' red zone touches are going to continue to increase. That's a big thing because Cooper Kupp's been leading those. He's had far more. He's the lion's share of those red zone touches. He's had 9 targets, but Woods is now caught up with him. He was on 9 targets through 3 games. Kupp didn't get any on Sunday. A lot of them went to Robert Woods. He's now up to 6. And he's got 2 touchdowns down there to Kupp's 4. And that is where these touchdowns are going to come for Robert Woods in the red zone. So he is going to get more. We saw it on Sunday. He got more red zone usage. He is going to bounce back. If you're a Robert Woods owner and a fan like myself, just keep faith. It's not always going to be pretty. He's going to have some bad weeks, but he's not going to finish wide receiver 38. He will finish as a wide receiver 2 at the minimum and maybe more.
How about Robbie Anderson?
Well, yeah. I mean, I might have to. I think the problem with Robbie Anderson is I don't really know what has happened to Sam Darnold. I really thought that he would be throwing the ball a lot more downfield, and that's not really been the case. I mean, Robbie Anderson is wide receiver 68, and the biggest problem I think for Robbie Anderson so far is he's not getting any high value touches. Because what Sam Darnold is doing is he's doing something that isn't sustainable, which is he looks up, he makes a read, and whenever it's play action, he runs. And that he's done a lot more with his legs than I think anyone ever projected. We joked about he's a leading rusher in football when it comes to touchdowns. I mean, it's lunacy, and it's also not sustainable because he's not. No disrespect to him, but he is not the athlete of a Kyler Murray, of a Lamar Jackson, of a Trey Lance, of a Jalen Hurts. He's not going to keep and Josh Allen. He's not going to be that guy all season. It's great now. It's almost like laughable, like a gimmick. But what will happen is teams will start to pick that up, and he's going to be forced to make more plays with his arm because he's been great with his arm in the sense of he's been given controlled plays. It's almost like he's on a prescript. It's almost like they've gone, right, we understand it's a complicated playbook. We're going to basically prescript the majority of your plays in the game. And we're going to simplify this offense. We're going to make it incredibly simple. Now, that's great for the first 4 weeks. And to be honest, to Carolina, at 3-1, you'd have taken it all day long. But you know what happens when it gets to bye weeks and teams get time to look at all the film? They haven't run a complicated scheme and they haven't run a complicated playbook. So all of a sudden, it comes to the fact of they probably run 40, 50 different variations of play and scheme. If that, teams will figure that out. Because if you haven't got that much on tape, teams will work out, okay, this is what we've got to do. So you're going to have to open the playbook up. Where I misread Robbie Anderson was obviously they paid him. He had that relationship with Darnold, and that has shown in times. But I thought Sam Darnold would have more control on this offense. Whereas right now, he's had virtually no control on the offense. He's not getting to call audibles. He's not getting to do a lot of pre-snap motion. He's not getting to really pick his own plays. It feels like a lot of it's prescribed and it's pre-scripted. And it feels like at the moment it's go to your first read. If not, go take an option route, try and extend the play. Can't do that, run for it, get a first down, go again. And that is kind of what's been going on. So you haven't seen Terrence Marshall Jr. get the targets. I mean, he's got about the targets I thought he would get at this stage, but I thought Robbie Anderson would have a lot more. And it's just been low stuff to DJ Moore. And similar to what I just said to the Rams, they'll pick this up. They'll start to take DJ Moore out of games, and they'll be required to rely on Terrence Marshall Jr. and Robbie Anderson more. I think Robbie Anderson will improve. Do I think he gets to where I had him at the start of the season, which is wide receiver 15? Probably not. I think he's going to finish somewhere between 24 and 36 if the Panthers start to open the playbook. If they don't and they continue with this, well, they're just going to get pummeled because teams will work it out. It's not going to take that long to work out what they've done because I can work it out and I'm an amateur. So, like, at the end of the day, if I can sit here and work it out, they're a far smarter guy. You know, everyone in the NFL is much smarter than me when it comes to this sort of stuff. They would have worked it out. And what you saw was Dallas started to pick this up. And Dallas aren't a particularly well-coached defensive unit. You would never look at the Dallas Cowboys and go, oh, well, they're a great defense. Not over the last couple of years anyway. So when they play, you know, they've got to play Tampa twice. Todd Bowles is going to be all over that. Like Todd Bowles is going to look at this. He's going to be rubbing his hands when he plays Carolina at this stage. So they're going to have to do things differently, and I think that's where we'll see what happens with Robbie Anderson. I still think big weeks are to come, but it might take a while. And if people are dropping him right now, I understand it. Like, I would say hold, but I understand people dropping him because you can get the likes of AJ Green or Emmanuel Sanders. And for me, like, if they're the choices right now, I get it because they're going to have a much safer floor, and they're probably going to they're all going to be round about the same sort of grouping. Maybe, but it's more likely that AJ Green and Emmanuel Sanders get there over the likes of Robbie Anderson. But I still think Anderson is going to have those big weeks. I would hold him, but I understand that people want to drop him. And again, if Emmanuel Sanders, AJ Green's there, I think it's fine. I think you can do that comfortably. But I do think those big weeks will come at some point. Any more? Have you got any stash plays? Anyone that you're thinking under the radar guys who haven't produced or haven't broken out yet that you think could break out?
Pretty stash, but I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing Bateman become fit. I think I mean, Hollywood Brown did score a decent touchdown this week, but I still think that wide receiver 1 spot is up for grabs there. I don't think they fully believe in him. I've got a real. I really like Bryan Edwards this year.
Yeah.
And he's kind of like I'm still waiting for his week of going off. I don't know whether it will, but I don't know. I think there's a spot there for a big wide receiver to do well. It's just on confidence, I think, and I think for Carr, if Carr can establish that Waller relationship with Edwards, which I think he's going to have to, or he's going to have to. I mean, he's been so consistent so far, Derek Carr. The way he's played, his passing's been exceptional. I don't know whether that's fully sustainable, or, where he sprays the ball around to random players all game, and I don't know whether that's that sustainable for the long haul. I still think you're going to end up with Waller and one other as the main receiver, and so I think Bryan Edwards could break out, and I'm liking what I see from Michael Carter as well. The Jets, I've got a feeling that once if Zach fully settles and pushes on from his performance from week 4, I think that'll open up the running lanes a little bit more, because at the moment it's still forcing him to throw. But again, once he finds his feet fully, he should be fine, which will open up the chance for Michael Carter to maybe create a name for himself.
Yeah, I definitely like both of those plays. I think they're players to definitely keep an eye on. I also like Hunter Renfrow in Vegas for very similar reasons to Bryan Edwards. I think both those guys. I'd have both those guys over Ruggs now, and I know Ruggs is the flashy first round pick, but I fancy Renfrow and Edwards to be more consistent. And maybe I think they can share a role. Maybe it will fluctuate. I think one of those guys will end up winning the primary job. It could be Edwards, it could be Renfrow. Right now, I'd say it's an absolute coin flip, but I don't see it being Ruggs. That's what I do see. I think Ruggs is a gadget trick play, deep ball threat. I think he's going to have usage, but he's not. He's like D-Jax. He's going to have like games where he catches 3 for 129 and 1, but he's going to have games where he catches like 1 for 9. Like, that's what's going to happen with him. The guys I like to break out, I keep mentioning Terrence Marshall Jr. I think it will happen for the same reasons I just talked about that. But another one I talked about for a few weeks now, and in fact, we probably missed the window on, is Darnell Mooney. I said to people, I really like Darnell Mooney with Justin Fields. I feel this matchup sort of really made sense to pair them. I think maybe even more so than with Allen Robinson. I know Allen Robinson is an elite wide receiver, but Darnell Mooney is kind of the future at this franchise in terms of the wide receiver position. I don't think Robinson's going to be there next year. And I think Justin Fields is getting on a page. I mean, we saw this: 7 targets, 5 catches, 125 yards, a touchdown. So I know he didn't get a touchdown, but I think we kind of missed the window. But he's someone who I think will. I would have said he was under the radar, but maybe he's not so much anymore. Other players, the one thing I'm really keen to see happen is someone like Jalen Reagor to break out for the Eagles, because I think something like that needs to happen. And Kendrick Bourne, believe it or not, is someone who I've been keeping an eye on. He's getting quite a few targets every week from Mac Jones. I don't know if it's enough to be sustainable, so I'm not saying I'm predicting this to be like an amazing thing to happen with Kendrick Bourne, but would it shock me that he ends up with more fantasy points than Jacoby Myers? I'm not sure it would, but I'm not sure if it's enough to be fantasy relevant. But that's what I'm keeping my eye on. Quick question from someone who posted this a while ago, from Michael Chapp here, and he's asked, I'm down 49 points in fantasy, and I have Herbert and Allen left to play. You think I'd pull it off? First of all, I don't know who's scoring. I'm going to just assume it's PPR.
PPR.
I would say you got PPR. Maybe. Well, yeah, I'd say you got maybe a 20% chance of that happening. I think it could happen. Like, it wouldn't shock me, but I wouldn't have that as a favorite. I think you need to get effectively 30 from Herbert and 20 from Allen.
Yeah.
And so to do that, you're needing Herbert to have a 4 touchdown game, Allen to catch 2 of them. That's effectively what you need. I mean, it's in the range of outcomes.
This Vegas,
Vegas
has been doing all right.
It really has, considering they rebuilt it. They've done all right. But yeah, I think I wouldn't say it was a gimme, but I would say it's possible, but unlikely. I think that's where I'd leave it with that. That will do it. Nath, appreciate you coming on, my man. Tell everyone at Rush Nation, if they don't know where to find you, they should. Where they can interact with you, where they can find the IDP podcast, and where they can just chat ball with you and rub your faces in your Arizona misery right now.
Yeah,
Patreon Paul was going to want to do this, so
yeah, at NATO NFL on Twitter. That's where you can hit me up, and obviously the 5 Yard IDP podcast on this channel. Yeah, thanks very much, Murf, for having me on. Been an absolute pleasure, mate.
Mate, I loved it. I loved you coming on. We'll get you back on at some point. Rush Nation, the Waiver Wire podcast, is going to come on hopefully after this, if not long after. And then we're back tomorrow. We've got the Dynasty podcast, and we've got the DFS Fan Team season long podcast with the game show with one of my very, very good friends on Wednesday. A guy I love, literally in the bottom of my heart. I'm very excited to have him on. Very good friend, debut on the podcast, and fellow Tampa Bay Buccaneer fan. So I'm very excited to have him on. I am 2-1 in the game show. I did pull off the win, less of a shock than the week before, but it does mean that Simo is on his own in the grand final. So we need to start filling some chairs there. And then Thursday, Nath will be back with the IDP show. And we'll also have the matchups pod. So, make sure you tune in to Nath on Thursdays. The podcast he drops is on Friday. That will just get you ready for the weekend with everything you need to know about your IDP matchups. And trust me, it's brilliant. There's a lot of information. I listen and rely on a lot of that when I'm even thinking and doing my rankings. So I couldn't give this man higher praise than he influences my fantasy praise rankings. So
that is great.
There you go. You're a smart man, and I've loved having you part of the family. People sit here and say, you really I think we are. We're really close. We chat every day. WhatsApp being down has been hurtful because we've not had to communicate as much.
What's going on?
I know, worrying what's going on. Maybe they shut it down because we've been exchanging too many messages. But we're going to get more of the family on. Definitely, we'll probably do a family podcast around Christmas, and everyone's faces will appear, and you can see everyone. But do subscribe to Nathan and to everyone there, because him and Bren's a long-time friend of yours, isn't he? You've been friends with Bren a long time.
Absolutely. Yeah, best man at each other's weddings.
That's worrying. I'm going to need to hear some best man speeches, stories as well offline. But Rush Nation, don't forget to check out manscaped.com for all of your below the men's belt grooming needs. Use the code 5Yard for 20% off. And yeah, just get in touch with the network. Subscribe to all the podcasts. We're flying high right now. Thank you to everyone who has contributed content wise, or just being part of the Patreon, or just even just getting in touch and asking questions. We really do appreciate your interaction. We've had an unbelievable month to start the year, far beyond any of our wildest expectations, and we continue to grow. Those of you that are going to the games on Sunday, I think, Nath, you're going to be there, aren't you? I think a few of the 5 guys are going to be there. I am not going to be there. I made a decision months ago to not go, because that's right for my family, and there's no judgments to anybody going or not going. But I made a decision with my family to not go. I also knew I'd be moving house around about now, and it's a little bit later than planned. But given the fact that I'll be doing that, will no doubt be taking up a lot of my time over the next few weeks. So yeah, that's played a massive part of it as well. But until later on in the week, Rush Nation, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for stopping by. And don't forget, as always, keep rushing.